She doesn't love you. She loves what she believes you could become. That's the pattern from the beginning. It's subtle, intoxicating. You feel it in the way she looks at you, not like she's seeing you, but like she's studying you. Measuring, imagining, not who you are, but who you might be. You see that spark in her eyes and think, she understands me. But she doesn't. She sees potential, a blank slate, a character. You're not being recognized, you're being cast. And the role she wrote for you? It wasn't yours. It never was. You stepped onto a stage you didn't build, wearing a costume you didn't choose, delivering lines you didn't write, and you mistook it for love. Carl Jung warned us, not with trendy quotes or viral sound bites, but with the brutal clarity of a man who spent his life navigating the unconscious, the hidden architecture of the human soul. And what he discovered about women disturbed even him. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Carl Jung, according to Jung, most women, like most men, don't fall in love with a person. They fall in love with a concept, a symbol, a projection. She doesn't choose you. She chooses a version of you that she created in her mind. You're not being loved. You're being recruited to play a part in a private myth. It's a fantasy she's rehearsed since childhood. And when you stop performing, when you deviate from the script, she doesn't rewrite the story. She replaces the actor. Jung called this inner dynamic the animus, the unconscious masculine image, within every woman's psyche. When the animus is immature or repressed, it doesn't guide her, it possesses her. It's the invisible voice pushing her toward dangerous men and away from stable ones. It's the force behind irrational arguments, moral superiority, emotional chaos, and spiritual projection. She doesn't realize she's doing it. She thinks it's love, but it's not. It's fantasy, disguised as affection. And you mistake it for being chosen. You think she sees you, but she only sees what she needs from you. You believe you're special, different, the one. But you're just the latest face projected onto the screen of her unmet inner needs. And when the illusion cracks, when the mask slips, you're left with nothing. Confused, betrayed, wondering what went wrong, but you didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being convincing. You broke character. You reminded her, unintentionally, that you're not a fantasy. You're real. And real is rarely enough for someone trapped in illusion. Jung said the only escape from this unconscious theater is a process he called individuation, the painful, lifelong work of becoming whole. But here's the brutal truth. Most men never begin. Why? Because you've been trained your whole life to seek approval, to find meaning through being accepted, to derive identity from women's affection. You've been taught to be chosen, to adapt, to adjust, to please. But the more you perform, the more you vanish. You become replaceable, expendable, forgettable. You believe that by becoming everything she wants, you'll finally be loved. But it's the opposite. The moment you become fully known, fully predictable, fully obedient, you don't become more lovable. You become invisible. Because what she's drawn to beneath the surface is not comfort. It's not safety. It's mystery. It's the undefinable. The man she can't fully control. You think transparency earns you love. But Jung would say, it earns you disinterest. And this is the paradox that imprisons men. You fear being alone more than being fake. You'd rather betray yourself than risk losing her. You'd rather perform than face the terror of being unloved while being you. Jung didn't offer sugar-coated advice. He offered a challenge. Individuation requires spiritual death before physical death. That means you'll have to let false versions of yourself die. The agreeable one, the adaptable one, the one begging for connection. You'll have to sit with your mind long enough to watch illusions burn. And that process? It's not glorious, it's not romantic, it's devastating, because as you walk this path, you start to see things you can never unsee. You see people's masks. You hear their lies, not the ones they tell others, but the ones they tell themselves. You notice the roles everyone plays to avoid looking in the mirror, and when you speak this truth aloud, they won't thank you. They'll mock you, accuse you, call you cold, arrogant, emotionally unavailable. But you're not the problem. You're the mirror, and people hate mirrors that show them what they're running from. Jung understood this. He spent decades treating patients terrified of confronting their shadow, the rejected parts of their psyche they buried in order to be accepted. And women, Jung warned, are especially susceptible when raised in cultures that reward avoidance of this confrontation. They're told they're naturally pure, naturally intuitive, that they don't need to dig deeper, that they already are what they seek. But Jung disagreed. He said the greatest danger for women is their unconscious animus, the inner masculine voice that speaks with false certainty, unearned moral authority and spiritual arrogance. If left unintegrated, it turns women into critics of men, judges of men, punishers of men, while remaining blind to their own projections. So what happens? You walk into a relationship believing you're her answer, her savior, her exception. You think that with enough love, enough consistency, enough proving, she'll finally see the real you. But that's not how projection works. Jung said, projection steals reality. It replaces truth with illusion. And until both men and women wake up from this illusion, they'll repeat the same tragedy, each blaming the other for the pain that began within. And here's the most ironic twist of all. The woman who once saw you as a hero will eventually see you as a villain, not because you changed, but because you failed to embody her fantasy, and she won't know she's doing it. She'll say you changed, that you let her down, that you became someone else. But the truth is, you simply stopped playing a character in her private myth. You weren't her villain, you just weren't her fantasy anymore. That's the betrayal she can't name. Not that you lied or failed or hurt her, but that you didn't become the myth she imagined. You didn't deliver the salvation she projected. You didn't complete the fairy tale she rehearsed in silence. And now, someone has to be blamed. She won't blame the fantasy. She won't blame the animus. She'll blame you. Jung said that when the animus is unrecognized and unintegrated, it behaves like a spiritual parasite. It steals reality, corrupts intimacy, hijacks judgment. You think you're being rejected because you're flawed. But you're not being rejected. You're being uncast from a role you never auditioned for. She didn't fall out of love with you. She woke up from a projection, and that's not your failure. That's what happens when illusion meets truth. But here's where most men crumble. Instead of seeing it clearly, they take it personally. They question their worth, replay every interaction, spiral into self-doubt. They try harder next time. Softer, quieter, safer, less disruptive, less themselves, and in doing so, they destroy what little truth was left. Because here's the part. No one tells you. The man who performs for love eventually loses both the act and the love. She might admire the mask. She might reward the obedience. She might cling to the version of you that conforms, but she'll never desire it. Because desire, real primal feminine desire, isn't drawn to perfection. It's drawn to presence, to mystery, to power, to wholeness, and wholeness doesn't negotiate for approval. Wholeness doesn't beg to be seen. Wholeness doesn't twist itself into someone else's dream. That's why most men fail in love, not because they're unworthy, but because they refuse to stand still and see who they really are. They trade their essence for a performance, and then wonder why no one applauds. Jung warned of this. He called it psychic possession, a state in which a man no longer lives from his authentic self, but from the demands of someone else's imagination. The tragedy? He volunteers. No one forces him. No one makes him compromise. He chooses to become the puppet, because the role feels safer than the silence of being unchosen. He tells himself he's being a good man, that he's sacrificing for love, that he's doing the right thing, but deep down he knows. He knows he's betraying himself, and betrayal, especially self-betrayal, always comes with a price. You don't get to keep your fire and your performance. You don't get to play the nice guy and stay fully alive. You don't get to worship her fantasy and still be respected. Because women feel it, even when they can't explain it. They feel when a man bends, they sense when he erodes. They recognize when his identity is no longer anchored in himself, but in her reaction to him. And that, paradoxically, is the moment attraction begins to die. Not because he's unkind, not because he's inattentive, but because he becomes predictable, obedient, tame. The very things he thought would win her, now bore her. Because instinct, real feminine instinct, doesn't crave safety. It craves mystery. It's not drawn to the man who exposes everything. It's drawn to the man she can't fully explain, the man she can't own. But here's the paradox. Most men fear being misunderstood more than being fake. They would rather be liked than respected. They choose performance over solitude. They choose applause over authenticity, and that is the real cost. Jung said that individuation, the path of becoming whole, is not for the faint of heart. It requires a man to walk alone, to sit in silence, to confront every lie he's told himself about love, about identity, about women. It's brutal. It requires spiritual death long before physical death, the death of the pleaser, the death of the victim, the death of the idea that someone else will complete you. That's why so few men do it, because becoming whole means leaving behind the illusion that you need her to become you. And here's the secret: you don't. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You don't need her affection to feel alive. You don't need her to reflect your value back to you, because the man who has seen his own shadow, who has met his own pain, his own chaos, his own unmet longings, cannot be controlled by anyone else's projection. He is no longer acting. He is no longer begging. He is no longer a character in a myth he didn't write. He is real, and real men terrify people. Why? Because they don't fit into categories. They can't be manipulated by guilt. They can't be tamed by expectation. They can't be lured by performance. Their presence is unsettling, not because they are cruel, but because they are free. Society doesn't know what to do with men like that, so it calls them distant, cold, unemotional, too intense. But what it's really saying is, you can't be bought. And that makes you dangerous. And women, especially women still possessed by the Animus, will often react with panic. They'll say you're emotionally unavailable, that you're too much in your head, that you're distant, hard to reach. What they mean is, they can't control you anymore. You've stepped off the stage, you've abandoned the script, you've stopped playing a role in their private dream, and now they have no idea what to do with you, because for the first time they're standing in front of a man, not a mirror. And when she faces a man who no longer mirrors her fantasy, she feels what no projection can prepare her for. Reality. Not the reality of who you could be. Not the narrative she wrote for you, but the brutal, undeniable truth. You're not here to save her. You're not here to perform for her. You're not here to become a symbol in her myth. You're here for one thing only: truth. Jung understood this confrontation to be the great crisis in both men and women, the moment when illusion dies and the real self emerges, not perfect, not polished, not ideal, but alive. He warned that when women refuse to face and integrate their animus, they become enslaved by it. They begin to project this internal masculine force onto men around them, not seeing those men as they are, but as characters meant to fulfill some unfinished inner drama. And men conditioned from birth to prove themselves walk right into the trap, willingly. You think you're her answer. You think you're her exception. You think that if you're just patient enough, good enough, present enough, she'll finally see the real you. But that's not how projection works. Projection isn't a conscious choice. It's an instinct, a blind substitution of fantasy for reality. And no matter how much love you offer, no matter how much you try to show her who you really are, it won't land, because she's not with you. She's with the idea of you, and when that idea breaks, when the myth collapses, you will be the one blamed, not because you failed, but because you refused to disappear into the illusion. Jung said this was the most dangerous part of all, when neither party in the relationship realizes they're trapped in mutual fantasy, two incomplete people dragging their unmet needs and childhood wounds into the arms of someone they barely understand, calling it love. But it's not love, it's possession. And the man who hasn't faced his own inner feminine, his own emotions, wounds, longings, becomes enslaved to hers. He lives to please her. He breaks himself to fit her mold. He believes her approval defines his worth. He doesn't realize he's not in a relationship. He's in a performance. And the saddest part? He thinks he chose this. But in truth, he was chosen to play a part. That's why Jung was feared, dismissed, misquoted. Because he didn't offer comfort. He offered a mirror. And that mirror shows you what the world desperately wants to keep hidden. No woman can complete you. No woman can validate your manhood. No woman can carry the soul you refuse to carry yourself. You think it's romantic to say, "I'd do anything for her." That she's your everything. But Jung would say that's not love, that's a man abandoning his own soul. You think you're being devoted, but you're really handing her your meaning, your center, your purpose, and begging her not to drop it. But she will, she must. Because no woman, no matter how nurturing, loving, or divine, can carry the burden of a man who won't carry himself. When she drops it, you'll feel betrayed, lost, shattered. But you shouldn't. You should thank her. Because in that moment of collapse, when illusion finally dies, you're given your first chance to meet the only person who can save you. You. And that's where the true journey begins. Not into more relationships, not into strategies, pickup lines or identity makeovers, but inward, into your own mind, your own soul, your own silence. Because the man who refuses to confront his unconscious will always serve the unconscious of others. He'll wear masks. He'll smile when he wants to scream. He'll perform when he wants to disappear. He'll become a ghost in his own life, a pleasing echo of what others expect him to be, but not anymore. You have a choice. You can keep chasing women, desperately hoping to be chosen, to be seen, to be enough. Or you can choose yourself. Not with arrogance, not with anger, but with sacred clarity. You stop blaming women for the roles you accepted. You stop resenting the projections when you willingly lived inside them. You stop waiting to be invited into manhood, and instead walk through the fire alone. And that's when it happens. The shift, the fracture. That's when the old self begins to burn. The obedient self, the nice guy, the approval addict, and from the ashes a new man begins to rise. Not flawless, not invulnerable, but whole. A man who no longer seeks validation. A man who can sit in silence and not shatter. A man who can face a woman's storm without losing his center. This man doesn't need applause. He doesn't need permission. He doesn't need to be loved to know who he is. And that's the man she will feel drawn to. Not because he needs her, but because he doesn't. Not because he fits her script, but because he burned it. Not because he's perfect, but because he's real. This is the paradox most men never escape. You've spent your whole life believing love was something you had to earn by being agreeable, romantic, reliable, predictable. You believed that if you just became her ideal, she'd stay. If you just played it right, she'd finally love the real you, but that's the lie, because you were never you to begin with. You were her idea of you, her projection. And when that projection cracked, the fantasy died, and when the fantasy died, she left. But that wasn't your failure. That was your liberation. Jung taught that freedom begins the moment we stop performing. When we stop bending for approval. When we stop allowing others, especially women, to dictate our value. The woman who once said, "You're everything I ever wanted," will someday say, "You've changed." Not because you actually changed, but because you stopped auditioning. Because the moment a man chooses himself fully, unapologetically, relentlessly, he becomes impossible to control. And this is where most men get accused of being cold, distant, detached, too intense. But what they really mean is, you're no longer moldable. You've left my fantasy. You've become someone I can't edit. And here's the thing Jung knew. Most people don't want the truth. They want comfort. They want familiarity. They want roles. The lover, the provider, the protector. But not the man. Because the man who no longer plays roles is unpredictable. He disrupts illusions. He walks his own path. He becomes a mirror, a reflection of what others fear facing in themselves. And most people hate mirrors. They don't want to see their projections die. They don't want to see their fantasies fall. They don't want to confront the emptiness that lies beneath the scripts they've been clinging to, but some will. A rare few. Those who have done the work, faced the shadow, burned the illusions, Those are the ones who will meet you with eyes that don't evaluate but witness, with hearts that don't demand but recognize, with souls that don't try to change your path but walk beside it, fully awake. And that is not a relationship built on projection. That is not possession. That is not codependency. That is truth. It is the rarest form of love, the kind born not from need, but from freedom. Not from fear, but from wholeness. She won't beg you to perform. She won't write scripts for you to act in. She won't confuse comfort with connection, because she's not looking for someone to complete her. She's looking for someone who is already complete. And you'll know it when you meet her. Not because she overwhelms you with romantic language, not because she makes you feel like a god, but because she doesn't need you to be anything other than who you are. There are no roles, no masks, no projections, just two humans standing face to face, unmasked, unafraid, uncompromising, and that's when you'll feel it, the silence, the clarity, the truth. You didn't need to be chosen to become a man. You needed to choose yourself, and in doing so, you became someone who can no longer be trapped in anyone's fantasy. Not hers, not society's, not your own. Because you are no longer acting. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer becoming. You are. And in that state, rooted, solid, present, you finally meet the world, not as a role, but as a man. So if you've made it this far, if your mind didn't flinch, if your conscience didn't scream, if instead something inside you whispered, finally, someone dares to say it, then this space was made for you. Subscribe to Mind and Empire. Because here we don't preach virtue. We study power, we sharpen the mind. We expose the game, so you can learn how to play it and win. Leave a comment if the world you thought you knew now feels like a stage. Tell me what truths you've had to bury, what masks you've worn. Because here, we do not fear the dark, we weaponize it. And like this video, not to show approval, but to send a message. That you're done being lied to, and ready to lie better. Let the others drown in sincerity. You were born to command,